YouTube is still being very weird. I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing it. Alright, that's fine though. We will simply move over here. And I starting a little later than I intended, mostly because I have I had to do something for a family member, but it should be that. If any luck, we will be good to with any luck, we should be good to go. And again, because I don't have someone who's like reliably in the chat, this might take me a little while to find my flow. But that's totally fine. And especially, I think then the chances of people popping in are a little bit lower in regards to this stream specifically, just because it's a... Dogs are freaking out about something. Neighbor is getting a package, that's all. Okay. So I'm fully expecting things to sort of start slower and then pick up as I sort of find my rhythm, as tends to happen with these streams where I don't have Claire in here sort of nudging me along or anything. I'd ask her to come in, but also... there's the element that, like, I don't think she ever went back to, like, the second stream, which she wasn't there for, so I don't know. And I would encourage y'all to do that. We're on the third part of this. We're pretty deep in. Dogs. The Amazon truck is literally fucking gone. Whatever. Okay. So here's what the plan is. YouTube chat is still not able to find my live stream, despite the fact that I literally have the live control panel up. It'll appear in multi-chat, it always does, but that's really, really strange. Also need to find a music volume. Okay, anyway. This is where we left off last time. So we talked about the sort of way the heavens were set into motion, the how the various gods were placed in their sort of right positions, and then we talked a little bit about like the faculties of the human body. And then we zoomed backwards towards the material stuff of the universe. And how that was pre-existent and molded and had certain characteristics, or maybe even better to say a lack of certain characteristics. I have these chocolate coated peanuts I'm having rather than any sort of lunch because I was rushing around this morning. One moment. And that was... we started talking about elementalism, I believe, was where we left off. We're talking about the receptacle, if and to what extent the four elements existed within it. All that's basically right. Okay. Before that time, just to say, so we begin at around 53B. Before that time, just to say, before the Demiurge came in and ordered things and set them all up properly. In truth, all these things were in a state devoid of reason or measure. But when the work of setting in order this universe was being undertaken, fire and water and earth and air, although possessing some traces of their own nature, were yet so disposed as everything is likely to be in the absence of God. And inasmuch as this was then their natural condition, God began by first marking them out into shapes by means of forms and numbers. Forms is lowercase here, you'll note. And that God constructed them so far as he could to be as fair and good as possible, whereas they had been otherwise. This above all else must always be postulated in our account. Now, however, is the disposition and origin of each of these kinds, which I must endeavor to explain to you in an exposition of an unusual type. This is loud. This feels loud, but I know it's not. This is an origin of these kinds I must endeavor to explain to you in an exposition of an unusual type. Yet, inasmuch as you have some acquaintance with the technical method which I must necessarily employ in my exposition, you will follow me. We're doing geometry now, and that's scary. In the first place, then, it is plain, I presume, to everyone that fire and earth and water and air are solid bodies. They are material. They exist. You can touch them. You can even touch fire, although you shouldn't. In the form of a body, in the form of a body, in every case possesses depth also. Further, it is absolutely necessary that depth should be bounded by a plane surface, and the rectilinear plane is composed of triangles. Okay, I half follow here. Geometry. Much to say, 3 dimensions is self-evidently more than 2. I am less clear on the triangle thing. I don't know if this is... I would be curious to know if to what extent more modern conceptions of geometry think this is think this can just be stated. Now all triangles derive their origin from 2 triangles, each having one angle right and the other's acute. And the one of these triangles has on each side half a right angle marked off by equal sides, while the other has the right angle divided into unequal parts by unequal sides. I think I follow. I remember my my right acute obtuse. It's hard for me to map that onto these more verbose descriptions of them, I won't lie. There's definitely someone more qualified to tackle the mathematical side of the Timaeus than I, but they don't have a virtual avatar, do they? So I'd love to talk with like one of the mathematical people. Like maybe I'll message Aleph about this actually. These we lay down as the principles of fire and all the other bodies, proceeding according to a method in which the probable is combined with the necessary. Principles which are still higher than these are known only to God and the man who is dear to God. This is an interesting way to talk about math. Known only to God and the man who is dear to God. Must now declare what will be the four fairest bodies, dissimilar to one another, but capable in part of being produced out of one another by means of dissolution. For if we succeed herein, we shall grasp the truth concerning the generation of earth and fire and the mean proportionals. For to no one will we concede that fairer bodies than these, each distinct of its kind, are anywhere to be seen. Wherefore we must earnestly endeavor to frame together these four kinds of bodies which excel in beauty, maintain we have apprehended their nature adequately. So we're talking about the platonic solids here. DuckDuckGo is locking up again. One moment. You notice there's 5. Don't worry about this. Don't worry about this one. And he's definitely not going to use these terms, so we'll see if we can have them. If not, there's always the image that's in the thumbnail that makes it pretty clear which is meant to be which. But you notice he says 4, not 5, and that's a fascinating little thing. But yeah, this is where the idea of the platonic, this is where term the 5 platonic solids comes from. Even I remember an old fucking spirit science video makes reference to this, which is interesting. Well, it's not interesting necessarily. It's just I'm curious. I know that guy isn't reading Plato. I know that guy isn't reading Plato, so I'm curious precisely where that angle of transmission came from. Now, of the two triangles, the isosceles possesses one single nature, with the scaling an infinite number. And of these infinite natures, we must select the fairest if we mean to make a suitable beginning. If then anyone can claim that he has chosen one that is fair for the construction of these bodies, he, as friend rather than foe, is the victor. We, however, shall pass over all the rest and postulate as the fairest of the triangles that triangle out of which, when two are conjoined, the equilateral lateral triangle is constructed as the third. The reason why is a longer story, which anyone refute us and discover that it is not so, we begrudge him not the prize. Accordingly, let these two triangles be selected as those wherefrom are contrived the bodies of fire and of the other elements. One being the isosceles, and the other that which always has the square at its greater side 3 times the square on its lesser side. One moment. Oh, too long. I don't know how, okay, this does annotate at least, which is interesting. The isosceles right angle triangle is each of the other two vertices an equal part of the right angle. The scalene right angle triangle has an equal parts of right angle. We'll consult this a little bit, because it seems to understand at least the what's being posited here. As much as the Center for Experimental Ontology, I don't know if you can take it at its word on everything. But Okay. Something like this. Interesting. Let's also just go, let's go and find the image I used for the thumbnail as well. I think we will benefit from that. Moreover, a point about which our previous statement was obscure must now be defined more clearly. It appears as if the four kinds in being generated all pass through one another into one another, but this appearance was deceptive. For out of the triangles which we have selected, four kinds are generated. Three of them out of that one triangle which has its sides unequal, and of the fourth kind alone composed of the isosceles triangle. Consequently, they are not all capable of being dissolved into one another so as to form a few large bodies composed of many small ones, or the converse. But three of them do admit this process. For these, three are all naturally component of one triangle, that when the larger bodies are dissolved, many small ones will form themselves from these same bodies, receiving the shapes that befit them. And conversely, when many small bodies are resolved into their triangles, they will produce, when unified, one single large mass of another kind. So let thus much be declared concerning their generation into one another. I believe... the bot has already presumably been sniped, but I feel the need to point out that that is apparently called shocked molestation. What? What are we doing? So two of them just came in at once. Okay. Commit this process. So Earth is the exception here. Is the important bit there. Three of them are naturally compounded of one triangle. All right. I'm curious why. I'm curious about the justifications of which is which here, and specifically why Earth needs to be set apart particularly. I mean, dirt doesn't burn well. That much certainly can be said, and you can always extract. You can always sort of sift out the particulate matter from water. I mean. And then you sort of look at the water, it's like, okay, yeah, no, I understand why Earth needs to be singled out as uniquely non-converting. I think it just takes a little bit of thinking and you realize where that thought comes from. And I suppose that if you're thinking about like the platonic solids, you then go for the one that doesn't quite work in the same way in the system. One of the two, but we'll get to it. In the next place, we have to explain the form in which each kind has come to exist and the numbers from which it is compounded. First will come that form which is primary and has the smallest components, and the element thereof is that triangle which has the hypotenuse twice as long as its lesser side. Let me look this up. I really do not like that DuckDuckGo does this. I just closed it. Fuck. Fuck. Okay, this is picture. This is easy enough to picture. Oh, it's fucking. It's just again, it's the way this shit's written out. This is why we have letters in math again. By the way, is so it's not all written out like shit. It's not all written like this shit. Get some of our visuals back. When a pair of such triangles are joined along the hypotenuse, and this is done thrice, by joining the hypotenuse and the short side together as to a center, there is produced from those triangles, 6 in number, one equilateral triangle. Something like this, then. Okay. And when 4 equilateral triangles are combined so that 3 plane angles meet in a point, they form one solid angle, which comes next in no order to the most obtuse of the plane angles. And when 4 such angles are produced, the first solid figure is constructed, which divides the whole of the circumscribed sphere into equal and similar parts. And the second solid is formed from the same triangles, but constructed out of 8 equilateral triangles, which produce one solid angle out of 4 planes. And when 6 such solid angles have been formed, the second body in turn is completed. And the third solid is composed of twice 60 of the elemental triangles conjoined, and of 12 solid angles, each contained by 5 plane equilateral triangles, and it has by production 20 equilateral triangular bases. I mean, I don't follow, but I can just based on what others have done for me, say what's being said here is that water is to icosahedron as air is to octahedron, as fire is to tetrahedron. All of which are formable out of the shapes that he is describing. I take his word on it anyway. Scaling its surface. Now, the first of the elemental triangles ceased acting when it had generated these 3 solids, the substance of the fourth kind being generated by the isosceles triangle. Again, you can see how you would feel the need to clarify why Earth doesn't seem as convertible as others, but It is interesting, the mechanism, and it's interesting that I didn't realize, I didn't recall anyway, that which is not clarified in text of these three. Now, the first of the elemental triangles ceased acting when it had generated these three solids, the substance of the fourth kind being generated by the isosceles triangle. Four of these combined with their right angles drawn together to the center produced one equilateral quadrangle. And 6 such quadrangles, when joined together, formed 8 solid angles, each composed of 3 plane right angles. And the shape of the body thus constructed was cubic, having 6 plane equilateral quadrangular bases. And seeing that there still remained one other compound figure, the fifth, God used it up for the universe in his decoration thereof. So the fifth is being very unceremoniously injected here. The fifth being the dodecahedron. Cube to Earth is much easier to understand. It's literally described as cubic, even if you can't quite follow the specific being laid out here. Now, in reasoning about all these things, a man might question whether he ought to affirm the existence of an infinite diversity of universes or a limited number. And if he questioned aright, he would conclude the doctrine of an infinite diversity is that of a man unversed in matters wherein he ought to be versed. But the question whether they ought really to be described as one universe or 5 is one which might with more reason give us pause. Now, our view declares the universe to be essentially one in accordance with the probable account, but another man, considering other facts, will hold a different opinion. Him, however, we must let pass. But as for the kinds which have now been generated by our argument, let's assign them severally to fire and earth and water and air. Okay, here we go. To earth let us give the cubic form. For of the 4 kinds, earth is the most immobile and the most plastic body. The necessity of the body which has the most stable basis must be preeminently of this character. Right, again. You can with relative ease get the particulate matter out of anything, although I'm interested how he justifies things burning up in this. You can't really burn dirt, so... So yeah, you can see that. Now the triangles we originally assumed, the base is formed by equal sides of its nature, more stable than that formed by unequal sides. Now the plane surfaces which are compounded of these several triangles, the equilateral quadrangle, both in its parts and as a whole, has a more stable base than the equilateral triangle. Wherefore, when we are preserving probable account, we assign the figure to earth, and of the remaining figures, the least mobile to water and the most mobile to fire. There is this is touching on an old idea that the 4 elements are essentially a spectrum of dynamism. So you have earth as the most static, fire as the most dynamic, and then it goes earth, water, air, fire. That I'm not sure if that idea originates here, but it is sort of what it is. Sort of the common understanding it will continue to be for quite a while. In the intermediate figure to air, and further, and we assign the smallest body to fire, and the greatest to water, and the intermediate to air, and again, first in point of sharpness to fire, the second to air, and the third to water. As regards all these forms, that which has the fewest bases must necessarily be the most mobile, since it isn't always the sharpest and most acute of all. And it must also be the lightest, since it's composed of the fewest identical parts. Again, there's also a spectrum of weight. This is another idea that was sort of held about the 4 elements, and this is why the ground you're walking on is made of earth, and fire likes to go up, and rivers flow, and all this stuff is because they have this sort of gradient of weight. Second comes second and point to the same qualities in the third. Of course, he's playing with this a little bit, because he talks about how there was earth involved. There's like a good amount of earth in the heavens, so clearly it's not all seeking to even itself out. Thus, in accordance with the right account and the probable, the solid which has taken the form of... I didn't even talk about the fucking what if there's 5 realities thing. I believe that has something to do with the dodecahedron? That's the best I recall anyway. It's a very odd little thing to just sort of say and then not elaborate upon. That, yeah, if you followed a different train of thought, you might think there are 5 realities, precisely 5, no more, no less. But we're on this train where we think it's 1. So we gotta leave that be for now. Other thing to just kind of say. Thus, in accordance with the right account of the probable, the solid which is taking the form of a pyramid shall be the element and seed of fire. Second order of generation we affirm to be air, and third water. One must conceive all these to be so small that none of them which taken singly in each of its several kind is seen by us. When many are collected together, their masses are seen. And moreover, as regards the numerical proportion which governs their masses and motions and their other qualities, we must conceive that God realized these everywhere with exactness, insofar as the nature of necessity submitted voluntarily or under persuasion, and thus ordered all in harmonious proportion. From all that we have hitherto said about these kinds, they will in all likelihood behave themselves as follows. Earth will keep moving when it happens to meet with fire and has been dissolved by its acuteness. Earth dissolution takes place in pure fire in a mass of air or of water, and this motion will continue until the particles of earth happen to meet together somewhere and reunite with one another, and they become earth again. For surely earth will never change into another form. Water, when broken up by fire or even by air, is capable of becoming a compound of 1 corpuscle of fire with 2 of air. The fractions of air which come from the dissolving of 1 particle will form 2 corpuscles of fire. And again, when a small quantity of fire is enclosed by a large quantity of air and water or of earth, and moves within them as they rush along, is defeated in the struggle and broken up, then 2 corpuscles of fire unite to make 1 form of air. And when air is defeated and disintegrated from 2 whole forms of air and a half, 1 whole form of water will be compounded. Again, if you look at evaporation, condensation, the way that, I don't know, water puts out fire, or, you know, air, like a gust of wind has on fire. It makes sense to presume that those 3 are more conversable with each other. If you don't fully know those principles. If you're just sort of observing, I think that's not an unfair thing to think. Once again, let us reason out their characters in this way. Never any of the other kinds are caught within fire, it is cut up thereby, owing to the acuteness of its angles and the line of its sides. This is a description of burning that is posited to have to do with these the sharp angles of these fucking tetrahedrons. Owing to the acuteness of its angles and the line of its sides, when it has been recomposed into substance of fire, it ceases to be cut. For the kind that is similar and uniform is in no case able to either cause any change in or to suffer any affection from a kind which is in a uniform and similar state. But so long as, in the course of its passage into another form, it is a weaker body fighting against a stronger, it is continually being dissolved. And again, whenever a few of the smaller corpuscles being caught within a greater number of larger corpuscles are broken up and quenched, then, if they consent to be recompounded into the shape of the victorious kind, they cease to be quenched and air is produced out of fire, and out of air, water. But if they fight against combining with these or with any of the other kinds, they do not cease from dissolution until either they are driven out to their own kindred, by means of the impact and dissolution, or else they are defeated and, instead of many forms, assume 1 form similar to the victorious kind, and continue dwelling therewith as a united family. Again, I think this is... I'm struggling to pin precisely what's being talked about, but you can think of this as, the way these things, like, justifications of this geometric formulation by way of referring to the way these things seem to interact with each other just observably. That's how I take this anyway. Moreover, it is owing to these affections that they all interchange in their places, for while the bulk of each kind keeps apart in a region of its own because of the motion of the recipient, yet those corpuscles, which from time to time become dissimilar to themselves and similar to others, are carried, because of the shaking, toward the region which belongs to those corpuscles whereto they have been assimilated. Okay. Such are the causes which account for the generation of all the unmixed and primary bodies, but within these four kinds other classes exist, whereof the cause must be sought in the construction of each of the two elemental triangles, each such construction having originally produced not merely a triangle of one definite size, but larger and smaller triangles of sizes as numerous as the classes within the kinds. Consequently, when these are combined amongst themselves and with one another, they are infinite in their variety. This variety must be kept in view by those whose purpose is to employ plausible reasoning concerning nature. Seems like we're kind of hedging bets here, maybe. It says that because it seems like it's saying the triangles themselves can vary. There's a much less clean way of looking at it. Moving on to something else here, but we're at least briefly foraying into something else here. But this feels like a hedging of bets, because to deal with the fact that obviously there's a great deal of variety within just Earth. If you think about that, you think of that as all everything that is the ground. Now, unless we can arrive at some agreed conclusion concerning motion and rest, as to how and under what conditions they come about, our subsequent argument will be greatly hampered. Okay, so we have motion, which when discussing in an ancient Greek context, is a concept that bundles in lots of ideas of change and causality, and of course Aristotle is keenly interested in the idea of motion. But we'll see what Timaeus has to say about it here. The facts about them have already been stated in part, but in addition thereto, we must state further that motion never consents to exist within uniformity. For it is difficult, or rather impossible, for that which is to be moved to exist without that which is to move. For that which is to move without that which is to be moved. In the absence of these, there is no motion, and that these should ever be uniform is a thing impossible. Okay, this is big. This is big. Basically, the idea of everything if everything is truly the same, truly sort of spread out uniformly, nothing about it's going to start changing if there's no impulse there. There's no possible condition that can lead to change if there's no diversity within thing. And this is of course going to be extremely influential. Aristotle can belittle the Timaeus all he wants, but we see the beginning of his entire metaphysics here. Accordingly, we must always place rest in uniformity and motion in non-uniformity. There it is. Things that are entirely sort of flat, consistent, will not change. Something is changing, that's because it is not sort of totally consistent within itself. Only must always place rest in uniformity and motion in non-uniformity. And the cause of the non-uniform nature lies in inequality. Now, we have explained the origin of inequality, but we have not declared how it is that these bodies are not separated according to their several kinds. Again, I would maybe also mention the old Pythagorean concept, supposedly within the hidden teachings of Plato as well. The one is one, and you have the indefinite dyad, which is the sort of infinite spaces on the line between 2 points, and these apparently interact with each other and create everything. So the one was never going to change. I'm being very careful with my words, because if I say it was never going to give rise to many, many would disagree depending on how they took that. But like there's not really a capability of a great diversity within oneness. It is oneness, but that sort of within two, once you have two, you have a theoretically infinite amount of diversity. Several kinds. Now we've explained the origin of equality, but we have not declared how these bodies are not separated according to their several kinds and cease not from their motion and passage one through another. Wherefore we shall once more expound the matter as follows. The revolution of the all, since it comprehends the kinds, compresses them all. Seeing that it is circular and tends naturally to come together to itself, and thus it suffers no void place to be left. Therefore, fire most of all has permeated all things. I think fire is being equated to heat here. And in a second degree air, as it is by nature second in fineness. So with the rest, for those that have the largest constituent parts have the largest void left in their construction. Those that have the smallest the least. Thus the tightening of the compression forces together the small bodies into the void intervals of the large. So, where there is a little bit of gap between Earth, because it's a bunch of cubes, and it's obviously not everything's laid out cubically, little bits of water will find their way into those cracks, and in the gaps between the icosahedrons, little octahedrons will find their way, and then finally tetrahedrons will fill in as much space as possible, but they won't fill in all space. Still going to leave a lot of weird little gaps. And that's why there's the most fire, which is being equated to heat and light and things. Seems the most sort of permeate. To avoid the construction is that the smallest the least. Thus the tightening of the compression forces together. The compression forces together the small bodies into the void intervals of the large. Therefore, when small bodies are placed beside large and the smaller disintegrate the larger, while the larger unite the smaller, they all shift up and down towards their own proper regions, where the change in their several sizes causes their position in space also to change. And since in this way, for these reasons, the production of non-uniformity is perpetually maintained, it brings about unceasingly, both now and for the future, the perpetual motion of these bodies. So, as they seek to fill in space, some of this clashing and compressing and uniting that is described a little bit above this is happening. This is natural contents of that desire to fill in all the space. Natural tendency might be the word. Desire is a little bit animistic. In the next place, we must observe that there are many kinds of fire. For example, there is flame, and the kind issuing from flame, which does not burn but supplies light to the eyes, and the kind which, when the flame is quenched, is left behind among the embers. So likewise of air, there's the most translucent kind, which is called by the name of ether. Ether gets a lot of magical connotation later, but for now it's good pure air that's real high up there. That's all it really means. And the most opaque, which is mist and darkness. Darkness is a separate substance and it's a kind of air. This might be a translation thing, but if so, that's interesting. Another species without a name, which are produced by reason of the inequality of the triangles. The kinds of water are primarily two, one being the liquid, the other the fusible kind. Now, the liquid kind, inasmuch as it partakes of those small particles of water which are unequal, is mobile both in itself and by external force owing to its non-uniformity in the shape of its figure. But the other kind, which is composed of large and uniform particles, is more stable than the first and is heavy, being solidified by its uniformity. But when fire enters and dissolves it, this causes it to abandon its uniformity. This being lost, it partakes more largely in motion. And when it has become mobile, it is pushed by the adjacent air and extended upon the earth, and for each of these modifications it has received a descriptive name. Melting for the disintegration of its masses and for the extension over the earth fluidly. So, it's interesting that there's like a kernel of truth to this. As I understand it anyway. Ice, like ice is solid because it's less active than in its liquid form. Obviously we're missing a part of the we're missing a state of matter here, and the mechanisms are not right, but it is at least true that heat sort of speeds it up, breaks it apart. That's true enough. Again, since the fire entering from the water does not pass through a void but presses on to the adjacent air, this in turn compresses the liquid mass, which is still mobile, into the abodes of the fire and combines it with itself, and the mass, being this, is compressed and recovering again its uniformity because of the departure of the fire. The author of its non-uniformity returns to its state of self-identity. This cessation of the fire is termed cooling, and the combination which follows on its departure is solidification. Or again, its uniformity because of the departure of the fire. I'm having trouble picturing the process, but I know what it's referring to. And the combination which follows on its departure solidification. Of all the kinds of water which we have termed fusible, the densest is produced from the finest and most uniform particles. The kind of unique form. Tinged with a glittering and yellow hue, even that most precious of possessions, gold, has been strained through stones and solidified. In the offshoot of gold, which is very hard because of its density and blackened color, is called adamant. And the kind which closely resembles gold in its particles has more forms than one, and in density is more dense than gold, and partakes of small and fine portions of earth so that it is harder, while it is also lighter owing to having large interstices with it. Particular, like I understand interstitial. The particular kind of bright and solid waters being compounded thus is termed bronze. The portion of earth that is mixed therewith becomes distinct by itself. Both grow old and separate again from the other, and then it is named rust. Grab my physical book. I need to know what the book. Timaeus. No insights. Okay. It seems that because it can be melted down, various precious metals here are being equated to gold, to water rather. Yeah, that's interesting. And the rest of such phenomena is no longer difficult to explain in full, if one aims at framing a description that is probable. For as regards this, whenever for the sake of recreation a man lays aside arguments concerning eternal realities, and considers probable accounts of becoming, gaining thereby a pleasure not to be repented of, he provides for his life a pastime that is both moderate and sensible. For this pastime let us now give free play, proceed to expound in order the subsequent probabilities concerning the same phenomena in the following way. So, we're kind of done with the stuff that directly interests much of what we'll be covering on the channel. I mean, some of this stuff will have alchemical implication. But there's some stuff about opinion and truth and opinion later. But for the most part, we are dealing with specific interactions between different elements, which Timaeus literally describes as like, he basically says, hey, let's list off some fun facts. Why not? And given that I've already had trouble kind of keep following along with some of this stuff, I don't know how productive going along with that's going to be, but we'll try for a little bit. The water that is mixed with fire, which is fine and fluid, is termed fluid owing to its motion. Thank you. It is fine and fluid, so it is termed fluid. Owing to its motion and the way it rolls over the earth. Also, it is soft owing to the fact that its bases, being less stable than those of earth, give way. When this kind is separated off from fire and air and is isolated, it becomes more uniform because of their outflow, which is compressed upon itself. And when it is thus solidified, the part of it above the earth which is most affected by this process is termed hail. And the part upon the earth, ice, and the part which is less affected and is still only half solid is called snow when it is above the earth, but when it is upon the earth that is solidified out of dew, it is called hoarfrost. Yep. Again, just we're applying stuff now. Now, as regards most forms of water that are intermingled with one another, the kind as a whole, consisting of water that has been strained through earth-grown plants, is called sap. Inasmuch as the several sorts have become dissimilar owing to intermixture, those are the kinds this produce are unnamed. Four of these kinds, however, being fiery and especially conspicuous, have received names. Of these, that which is heating to the soul as well as the body is called wine. Huh? Okay, that's kind of funny. That which is smooth and divisive of the vision, therefore bright to look upon and gleaming, glistening in appearance, is the species oil, including pitch and castor oil and olive oil itself and all the others that are of the same character. And all that kind which tends to expand the contracted parts of the mouth so far as their nature allows, and by this property produce sweetness, has received its general designation the name of honey, and the foamy kind which tends to dissolve the flesh by burning, and is secreted from all the saps is named for juice. Okay. We're doing a lot of, so it's a lot of, but what about? Of the species of earth, that which is strained through water becomes a stony substance in the following way. When the water commingled therewith is divided in the process of mingling, it changes into the form of air. When it has become air, it rushes up to its own region, because there was no void space above them, therefore it pressed against the adjacent air. It being heavy, when pressed and poured round the mass of earth, crushed it forcibly and compressed it into the spaces from which the new air was ascending. When earth is thus compressed by the air so as to be indissoluble by water, it forms stone, of which the fair sword is not composed of equal and uniform parts and transparent, marble presumably. The coarser sort the opposite. That kind from which all the moisture has been carried off by the rapidity of fire, and which is more brittle in its composition than the first kind. The kind to which we have given the name of earthenware. Clay, I suppose. Well, yeah, clay. But sometimes when moisture still left in the earth has been fused by fire and has cooled again, it forms a species which is black in hue. On the other hand, there are two kinds which in exactly the same manner are isolated after the mixture for much of their water, but are composed of finer parts of earth and are saline. Which become semi-solid and soluble again by water. One of them is purgative of oil and earth and forms a species called lye. And the other, which blends well with the combination which affects the sensation of the mouth, is that substance which is customarily termed beloved of the gods, namely salt. Again, I think about, the process of extracting salt from salt water, and you see how this maybe comes about, where this idea maybe comes from. We'll do a couple more of these, then I'm maybe going to skip to the end here. I encourage everyone to read through this, and I certainly will. Again, I have read it before. I'm not sure if I got through this chunk of it, honestly. I might have sort of tapered off, but you should read the whole thing because you should get full context, and a lot of this seems like it has a lot of alchemical relevance. But I don't know if I can read this whole block here. I gotta actually eat something proper, not just these chocolate-coated peanuts, which are making me feel a little sick. As regards to the kinds which are a blend of these two and are soluble by fire and not by water, their composition is due to the following cause. Fire and air do not melt masses of earth, for inasmuch as their particles are smaller than the interstices of its structure, they have room to pass through without forcible effort and leave the earth undissolved. While the result that it remains unmelted, whereas the particles of water, being larger, must use force to make their way out and consequently dissolve and melt the earth. Thus, earth, when it is not forcibly condensed, is dissolved only by water. When it's condensed, it is dissolved by fire only, since no entrance is left for anything save fire. Water, again, when most forcibly massed together, is dissolved by fire only, but when massed less forcibly, both by fire and air. The latter acting by way of the interstices, and the former by way of the triangles. But air, when forcibly condensed, is dissolved by nothing save by way of its elemental triangles, and when unforced, it is melted down by fire only. What the fuck is unforced air? I can't picture that. Okay. As regards to classes of bodies which are compounds of earth and water, so long as the water occupies the inner spaces of earth which are forcibly contracted, the portions of water which approach from without find no entrance, but flow round the whole mass and leave it undissolved. But when portions of fire enter into the interspaces of the water, they produce the same effects on water as water does on earth. Consequently, they are the sole causes why the compound substance is dissolved and flows. And of these substances, those which contain less water than earth from the whole kind known as glass, and all the species of stone called fusible, while those which contain more water include all the solidified substances of the type of wax and frankincense. We're playing Doodle. We're just gonna. I'm just gonna let these guys play Doodle God for a little while here, I think. Okay, we're moving on to sense perception here. Which again, I don't think we're gonna go all the way through this, but I think it's interesting to at least get a sense of how this is being perceived. My eyes were glossing over a little bit there, but they probably will before too long. But I think this section's longer. Now we have explained with some fullness the four kinds, which are thus variegated into their shape and combinations and permutations. We have still to try to elucidate the causes which account for their effective qualities. Now, first of all, the quality of sense perceptibility must always belong to the objects under discussion. But we have not as yet described the generation of flesh and the appurtenances of flesh, nor of that portion of soul which is mortal. But in truth, these last cannot be adequately explained apart from the subject of the sensible affections, nor the latter without the former, while to explain both simultaneously is hardly possible. Therefore, we must assume one of the two to begin with, and return later to discuss our assumption. In order, then, that the affective properties may be treated next after the kinds, let's presuppose the facts about body and soul. Okay, well, we definitely don't want to skip this. Maybe the sense perception stuff. Firstly, then, let us consider how it is that we call fire hot by noticing the way it acts upon our bodies by dividing and cutting. And its property is one of sharpness we all, I suppose, perceive, and has been played out previously. It's funny, that's an interesting way to look at it, though. That fire is literally like a million little blades, little sharp needles almost. As regards the thinness of its sides, the acuteness of its angles, and the smallness of its particles, and the rapidity of its motions, owing to all which properties fire is intense and keen, and simply cuts whatever it encounters. These properties we must explain by recalling the origin of its form. How that it above all others is the one substance which so divides our bodies and minces them up as to produce naturally both that affection which we call heat and its very name. The opposite affection is evident, but nonetheless must not lack description. When liquids with larger particles which surround the body enter into it, they drive out the smaller particles. But as they cannot pass into the room, they compress the moisture within us, so that in place of non-uniformity in motion, they produce immobility and density. This results in uniformity and compression. If that which is being contracted contrary to nature fights, in accordance with its nature, thrusts itself away in the contrary direction. And to this fighting and shaking we give the name of trembling and shivering. This affection as a whole, as well as the cause thereof, is termed cold. So, cold is being attributed largely to water here, I suppose. At least from the description of being liquid. By the term hard, we indicate all things to which our flesh gives way. By the term soft, all those which give way to our flesh. And these terms are similarly used relative to each other. Now, a substance gives way when it has its base small, but when it is constructed of quadrangular bases, being very firmly based, is a most inelastic form. So too is everything which is a very dense composition and most rigid. This matches basically what we've heard, although the use of hardness, which is a quality which I always assume would have a form, it's being described in not terribly uncertain terms as existing only in relative. So that makes me question. The nature of heavy and light would be shown most clearly if, along with them, we examined also the nature of above and below, as they are called. If there really exist two distinct and totally opposite regions, each of which occupies one half of the universe, the one term below, towards which move all things possessing any bodily mass, and the other above, towards which everything goes against its will. This is a wholly erroneous supposition, for inasmuch as the whole of heaven is spherical, all its outermost parts, being equally distant from the center, must really be outermost in a similar degree. And one must conceive of the center, which is distant from all the outermost parts by the same measures, as being opposite to them all. Seeing then, I actually am following this a little bit. Imagining that, like, he's sort of saying that upness and downness are not absolute categories, because that would imply the entire universe is more like a pillar. And obviously it's a big sphere, apparently. Seeing then the cosmos is actually of this nature, which the bodies mentioned can one set above or below without incurring justly the charge of applying a wholly unsuitable name. For its central region cannot really be termed either above or below, but just central. Though its circumference neither is central nor has it any one part most divergent than another from the center or any of its opposite parts. To that which is in all ways uniform, what opposite names can we suppose are rightly applicable, or in what sense? I got it, Discord ping. Fuck it. Okay. Suppose there were a solid body evenly balanced at the center of the universe, it would never be carried away to the extremities because of the uniformity in all respects. Nay, even were a man to travel round it in a circle, he would often call the same part of it both above and below, according as he stood now at one pole, now at the opposite. Seeing that the whole is, as we said just now, spherical, the assertion that it has one region above and one below does not become a man of sense. By the way, sort of just casually presupposing a round Earth here. Like, this was not a terribly controversial question at the time. The Earth is simply round. Like, that was known. And the origin of these names and their true meaning, which accounts for a habit of making these verbal distinctions, even about the whole heaven, must determine on the basis of the following principles. Suppose that a man were to take his stand in that region of the universe in which the substance of fire has its special abode, and were also that substance to which it flies is collected in largest bulk. Suppose that having the power to do so, he were to separate portions of the fire and weigh them, putting them on scales and lifting the balance and pulling the fire by force into this similar air, it is obvious that he will force the smaller mass more easily than the larger. If the two masses are lifted up simultaneously by a single effort, the smaller will necessarily yield more and the larger less, owing to its resistance. Force exerted. The larger mass will be said to be heavy and moving down, the small light and moving up. This is just what we ought to detect ourselves doing in our region here. Standing on the earth and detaching various earthly substances, sometimes pure earth, we pull them into the dissimilar air by force and against nature. Since both of these kinds cleave to their own kindred, and the smaller mass yields more easily and follows first as we force it into the dissimilar kind. Wherefore we name it light. In the region to which we force it above, and the conditions opposite thereto, we name heavy and below. Thus, these must necessarily differ in their mutual relations, because the main masses of the kinds occupy regions opposite to one another. When we compare what is light in one region with what is light in the opposite region, and the heavy with the heavy, the below with the below, the above with the above, what I know what these quotation marks are doing here, we shall discover that these all become and are opposite and oblique and in every way different in their mutual relations. Oh man, the background's playing Life right now. I might have to take this one off, it's too fucking good. There is, however, this one fact to be noticed about them all, and that is the passage of each kind to its own kindred mass which makes the moving body heavy, and the reason to which such a body moves below, while the opposite conditions produce the contrary results. Let this then stand as our account of the causes of these conditions. So, again, it seems that we're doing the sort of elements trying to sort themselves as a justification for weight, which is typical enough. That's in Pliny as well. As far as that's how I read this, at least. A smoothness and roughness, anyone might be able to discern the causes and explain them also to others. The cause of the latter is hardness combined with irregularity, and of the former, regularity combined with density. Right, okay. Yeah, I suppose that's true enough. In respect to the affections common to the whole body, very important point, which still remains, is the cause of the pleasures and pains attached to the sense affections which have been discussing. And the cause also of those affections which have become perceptible by means of the bodily parts involved in themselves concomitant pains and pleasures. Let us then try to grasp the causes in connection with every perceptible and imperceptible affection in the following way, bearing in mind the distinction we previously drew between mobile and immobile substances. For it is in this way that we must track down all those facts that we intend to grasp. Whenever what is naturally mobile is impressed by even a small affection, it transmits in a circle particles passing on to one another this identical impression until they reach the organ of intelligence and announce the quality of the agent. I don't even know where to begin with this. Okay, there is a... So... We're touching upon the idea of nerves, though it doesn't seem like it actually needs anything like a nerve to do this, and it travels as circles? Okay. But a substance of the opposite kind, being stable and having no circular movement, is only affected in itself and does not move any other adjacent particle. Consequently, since the particles do not transmit to one another at the original affection, it fails to act upon the living creature as a whole. The result is the affected body is non-percipient. This is the case when the bones and the hair and all our other parts are mainly earthly, whereas the former character belongs especially to the organs of sight and hearing, and to the fact they contain a large quantity of fire and air. This was established a little bit earlier, in kind of a weird little diversion a while ago. Now, the nature of pleasure and pain we must conceive in this way. When an affection which is against nature violent occurs within us with intensity, it is painful. Whereas the return back to the natural condition when intense is pleasant. And an affection which is mild and gradual is imperceptible, while the converse is of a contrary character. And the affection which in its entirety takes place with ease is eminently perceptible, but does not involve pain or pleasure, such, for example, the effects of the visual stream itself, which, as we said before, comes in the daylight of a body substance one with our own. For no pains are produced therein by cuttings or burnings or any other affections, nor does its reversion to its original form produce pleasures, but it has most intense and clear perception concerning every object that it affects, and every object also in which it strikes against or touches. The force is wholly absent both from its dilation and from its contraction. It's talking about sight here. There's sights that can be painful. But those bodies which are composed of larger particles, since they yield difficulty to the agent and transmit their motions to the whole, feel pleasures and pains. Pains when they suffer alterations, and pleasures when they are restored to their original state. Fair enough. And all those bodies which undergo losses of substance, emptyings that are gradual, but replenishings that are intense and abundant, become insensitive to the emptyings, but sensitive to the replenishings. Consequently, they furnish no pains to the mortal part of the soul, but the greatest pleasures, a result which is obvious in the case of perfumes. But all those parts which undergo violent alterations and are restored gradually and with difficulty to their original condition, produce results the opposite of those last mentioned. And it is evident that this is what occurs in the case of burnings and cuttings of the body. Yeah. A cut scabbing over does not necessarily feel good, because the pain was very sudden. The relocation, the healing is very slow. Fairly easy to sort of wrap your head around, I think. And now we have given a fairly complete state of the affections which come to the body as a whole, and of all the names which belong to the agents which produce them. Next, we must try, if happy we were able, describe what takes place in the several parts of our bodies, both the affections themselves and the agents to which they are ascribed. Firstly, then, we must endeavor to elucidate as far as possible those affections which we omitted in the previous account of the flavors, they being affections peculiar to the tongue. It is evident that these also, like most other, are brought about by means of certain contractions and dilations. And more than other affections, they involve also conditions of roughness and smoothness. For all the earthly particles which enter in by the small veins, which, extending as far as the heart, serve as it were for testing instruments of the tongue. When they strike upon the moist and soft parts of the flesh, and I'm going to finish this paragraph, and this is probably about where we start skipping a little bit. They're melted down, contract the small veins, and dry them up. And these particles, when more rough, appear to be astringent, when less rough, harsh, and such as act on these veins as detergents and wash out all the surface of the tongue. When they do this excessively and place such hold in the tongue as to dissolve part of its substance, such, for example, is the property of alkalines, are all termed bitter. Also, those which have a property less strong than the alkaline, being detergent in a moderate degree, seem to us to be saline, more agreeable, as being devoid of the rough bitterness. So, before we do the big skip, I want to talk about something that happened here that I didn't really remember to fixate upon. Which is that we have our 4 elements here, then we have a 5th. And this one is only ever alluded to. It's mentioned as it's definitely never broke, like, geometry is never broken down with the sort of level of granularity we see with the others. That's another example of, like, sort of potentially hidden things. It's alluded to. It's talked about as having kind of a godly character to it. And that is our dodecahedron here. This one is in some way special. It also gets a mention in the Phaedo, right? Talking about humors. We're going to pick up from 88A. And we'll finish it out from here. This is talking about various ways the body, from everything out from here is talking about various ways the body is affected. Drunkenness, disease, sort of various sensations of experience, and we're gonna go ahead and leave those be. It is of some interest in the development of medicines, and again, it's also all very much of alchemical interest, but we're gonna kind of leave that all be for now. Moving on to 88A. We will pick up and we will take this out to the end. So likewise, we must conceive of that compound of soul and body which we call the living creature. Whenever the soul within it is stronger than the body and it is a very passionate state, it shakes up the whole body from within and fills it with maladies. Whenever the soul ardently pursues some study or investigation, it wastes the body. And again, when the soul engages in public or in private, in teaching battles of words carried on with controversy and contention, it makes the body inflamed and shakes it to pieces. And induces kataras, and thereby it deceives the majority of so-called physicians and make them ascribe the malady to the wrong cause. A little bit of dissing of doctors of his time, but also, you know, when you get angry, you feel pretty bad. When you're really dedicated to something, you don't take care of yourself. All that stuff here is being sort of justified here. As being sort of products of the soul becoming disjointed from the body. That's kind of interesting. And on the other hand, when a large overbearing body is united to a small and weak intellect, inasmuch as 2 desires naturally exist among men, desire of food for the body's sake and desire of wisdom for the sake of the most divine part we have, most of the stronger part prevail and augment their own power. But they make that of the soul obtuse and dull of wit and forgetful. Thereby they produce within it the greatest of diseases, ignorance. So, the pursuit of material needs overwhelms, and the soul goes undernourished. This sounds like metaphor. It might not be metaphor. Like, ignorance is a disease. If you or I said that, we would mean it metaphorically. I'm not sure Plato means it metaphorically. He traces it very, like, even I was just skimming this stuff earlier. He traces a pretty, like, there's a pretty direct line between some of the other stuff he was talking about in this. Both these evils, the one means of salvation is this: that they should exercise the soul without the body, nor the body without the soul, that they may be evenly matched in the sound of health. Thus the student of mathematics or of any other subject, who works very hard with his intellect must also provide his body with exercise by practicing gymnastics. While he who is diligent in molding his body must, in turn, provide his soul with motion by cultivating music and philosophy in general. If either should deserve to be called truly both fair and good. So you gotta take care of your body. You gotta make sure you're not neglecting in the pursuit of whatever sort of intellectual ideas you have. He's not advocating for a complete sort of rescinding of any commitment to the physical world, as some others might. In both these evils, the one means of salvation is this: neither to exercise the soul without the body, nor the body without the soul. I mean, it does feel noted that Plato was apparently quite physically fit in his heyday, so this is probably of interest to him, though he was quite old when he was writing this, so maybe not so much. That they may be evenly matched in sound of health. Thus, the student of mathematics or of any other subject who works very hard with his intellect must also provide his body with exercise by practicing gymnastics. While he who is diligent in molding his body must in turn provide his soul with motion by cultivating music and philosophy in general. If others reserve... Okay, we read this. The various parts likewise must be treated in the same manner, in imitation of the form of the universe. Doing macrocosm, microcosm stuff again. Whereas the body is inflamed or chilled within by the particles that enter it, and again is dried and moistened by those without, suffers affections consequent on both these motions. Whenever a man delivers his body in a state of rest of these motions, overpowered and utterly perishes. Whereas if a man imitates that which we have called the nurturer and nurse of the universe, and never, if possible, allows the body to be at rest but keeps it moving, and by continually producing internal vibrations defends in its nature's way against the inward and outward motions. So the value of exercise here is being taken as sort of the value of keeping yourself in motion, not allowing various sort of things to impede upon you. Various sort of outside particles to upset your sort of balanced humors. Which is sort of a way to sort of bring this sort of material theory to completion, interestingly. By means of moderate vibrations, arranges the affections of particles which stray about in the body in their due reciprocal order, according to their affinities, as described in the previous account which we have given of the universe. Then he will not suffer foe set beside foe to breed war in the body and disease. He will cause friend to be set beside friend so as to produce sound health. Further, as concerns the motions, the best motion of a body is that caused by itself in itself. This is most neatly akin to the motion of intelligence and the motion of the universe. Motion due to the agency of another is less good. Interesting, again, he believes this is even possible, others will not. Others will say this is only everything is, you can't have motion in and of itself, the Stoics certainly thought that way. Maybe not that you can, but that the human is capable of such a thing, they certainly didn't think. And the least good motion is that which is imparted to a body lying in a state of rest, which moves it piecemeal by means of others. Wherefore, the motion that is best for purging and renovation of the body consists in gymnastic exercise. The second best is the motion provided by swaying vehicles, such as boats or any conveyances that produce no fatigue. I don't know if I agree that's great. Sounds pretty sickening. Or the third kind of motion, although useful for one who is absolutely driven to it, is by no means acceptable under any other conditions. To a man of sense, it being the medical kind of purging by means of drugs. For no disease which do not involve great danger ought to be irritated by drugging. For in its structure, every disease resembles in some sort the nature of the living creature. For in truth, the constitution of these creatures has prescribed periods of life of the species as a whole, and each individual creature likewise has a naturally predestined term of life apart from the accidents due to necessity. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, where are you going with this? From the very beginning, the triangles of each creature are constructed with a capacity for lasting until a certain time, beyond which no one could ever continue to live. With respect to the structure of disease, also the same rule holds good. Whenever anyone... Okay, he's not saying that, this isn't like, except, drugging is a denial of predestined death or whatever. That's that I was about to say. Whenever anyone does violence thereto by drugging, despite the predestined period of time, diseases many and grave, in place of few and slight, are wont to occur. Wherefore one ought to control all such diseases, so far as one has time to spare, by means of dieting rather than irritate a fractious evil by drugging. So, the health theory here is a little dubious, but it seems to be that if you're using remedies when it's not strictly necessary, the disease will try to kick back in a sense. I don't know about that one. And now we move into just a little bit of ethics to close us out. Concerning both the composite of living creature and the bodily part of it, how a man should both guide and be guided by himself so as to live a most rational life, let our statement stand thus. But first, with special care, we must make ready the part which is to be the guide to the best of our power, so that it may be as fair and good as possible for the work of guidance. Now, to expound the subject alone in accurate detail would it itself be a sufficient task. But treating it merely as a side issue, if we follow the lines of our previous exposition, we may consider the matter and state our conclusions not inaptly in the following terms. I think we're referring back again to Republic. And yeah, we definitely are. Okay. We have frequently asserted that there are housed within us in 3 regions 3 kinds of soul, and that each of these has its own motions. So now likewise we must repeat, as briefly as possible, the kind which remains in idleness and stays with its own motions, in repose necessarily becomes weakest, whereas the kind which exercises itself becomes strongest. Wherefore care must be taken that they have their motions relatively to one another in due proportion. I should specify the 3 kinds of soul. That is the appetitive, the sort of thing that wants just sort of material things, including of course hunger. You know, that's your lust, your gluttony, your greed. I guess what you'd call the ambitious part, the one that wants glory and recognition. And then the rational part, the one that contemplates, that philosophizes, that reasons. And so, ideally you want the rational to take hold, followed by the, sort of with the sort of glory-seeking, ambitious part subdued to it, but higher than the appetitive, which is kept in check by them both. That was the sort of final conclusion of Republic, and here it's being re-emphasized. And as regards the most lordly kind of our soul, we must conceive of it in this wise. We declare that God has given to each of us, as his daimon, that kind of soul which is housed on the top of our body and which raises us, seeing that we are not a earthly but a heavenly plant up from the earth towards our kindred in the heaven. And here we speak most truly, for it is by suspending our head and root from the region whence the substance of our soul first came, the divine power keeps upright our whole body. So, again, it's placed. The soul is placed on a higher level again here, and there's an idea that we're sort of that the aim is to sort of reach back towards that. It's not articulated the most clearly here. I feel like it's maybe articulated better in previous parts, but interesting. Whoso then indulges in lust or in contentions and devotes himself overmuch thereto must of necessity be filled with the pains that are wholly mortal. And altogether, so far as it is possible to become mortal, fall not short of this in even a small degree, as much as he has made great his mortal part. But he who has seriously devoted himself to learning and to true thoughts, and has exercised these qualities above all his others, must necessarily and inevitably think thoughts that are immortal and divine. If so be that he lays hold on truth, and insofar as it is possible for human nature to partake in immortality, he must fall short thereof in no degree. inasmuch as he is forever tending his divine part in duly magnifying that diamond who dwells along with him, he must be supremely blessed. So we're placing the act of reasoning as a kind of as a divine thing. It is the part of the human that is closer to divinity that acts when it engages in rational thinking, and ultimately begins to contemplate the divine once again, the divine itself. In the way of tendence of every part by every man is one, namely to supply each with its own congenial food and motion. And for the divine part within us, the congenial motions are the intellections and revolutions of the universe. These each one of us should follow, rectifying the revolutions in our head. If you go back to previous parts, this is probably going to be the most sort of lacking in commentary because it's the stuff I'm least prepared to jump off from. I mean, it already is. But the sort of revolutions in the universe, revolutions within the soul, that has all been previously established, which were distorted at our birth by learning the harmonies and revolutions of the universe, and thereby making the part that thinks like unto the object of its thought, in accordance with its original nature. And having achieved this likeness, attained finally to that goal of life which is set before men by the gods as the most good both for the present and for the time to come. Now the task prescribed for us at the beginning to give a description of the universe up to the production of mankind would appear to be well nigh completed. But as regards the mode in which the rest of living creatures have been produced, we must make a brief statement. I think there is no need to speak at length, for by such brevity we will feel ourselves to be preserving a right proportion in our handling of these subjects. Wherefore let this matter be treated as follows. A little bit of ethical thinking here. Again, we're the sort of rational dialectical process of philosophy is considered to be is in a way reaching back up to the divine source, aspiring to be more like it by being more like the sort of perfectly revolving universe, which is itself built upon that model. Oh, we're doing more reincarnation stuff. Okay. According to their probable account, all those creatures generated as men who proved themselves cowardly and spent their lives in wrongdoing were transformed. At their second incarnation, into... Again this. Oh, good lord. Okay. It's funny because Plato is not nearly as bad to a woman as an Aristotle or whoever, but Jesus Christ. It feels funny that he hits upon this on 3 separate occasions. And it was for this reason that the gods at the time contrived the love of sexual intercourse by constructing an animate creature of one kind in us men, and of another kind in women, and then made these severally in the following fashion. From the passage of egress for the drink, it receives and joins in discharging the fluid which has come through the lungs beneath the kidneys into the bladder, and has been compressed by the air. They bore a hole into the condensed marrow which comes from the head down the neck and along the spine, which marrow in our previous account we termed seed. The less said about this, the better. In the marrow, inasmuch as animate and has been granted an outlet, it has endowed the part where its outlet lies with a love for generating by implanting therein a lively desire for emission. Maybe the less said about this, the better. Wherefore in men the nature of the genital organs is disobedient and self-willed, like a creature that is deaf to reason. It attempts to dominate all because it's friendly lust. And women again, owing to the same cause, whenever the matrix, or as it is called, which is an indwelling creature. I don't even know what to say to that. Desires of childbearing. I'm trying to get through this as quick as I fucking can. Remains that fruit long beyond the due season, it is vexed and takes it ill. By straying all ways to the body and blocking up the passages of the breath and preventing respiration, it casts the body into uttermost distress. Causes moreover all kinds of maladies. So I guess we're talking about menstruation now. in a pretty fucking, a pretty wild way. Till the desire and love of the two sexes unite them. Then, culling as it were the fruit from trees, they sow upon the womb as upon plough soil, animalcules are invisible for smallness and unshapen. Then again, they mold into shape and nourish to a great size within the body, after which they bring them forth to the light and thus complete the generation of the living creature. In this fashion, then, women and the whole female sex have come into existence. Yeah, I'm sure. In the tribe of birds are derived by transformation, growing feathers in place of hair from men who are harmless but light-minded. I'm thinking about Republic again. I'm thinking about the myth of where various people chose to be animals for their own reasons, and that was in some ways kind of treated as wise. Like, I think about how Odysseus is described in the myth of Men, too, who being a student of the worlds above, suppose in their simplicity that the most solid proofs about such matters are obtained by the sense of sight. And the wild species of animals that goes on foot is derived from those men who have paid no attention at all to philosophy, nor studied at all the nature of the heavens, because they cease to make use of the revolution within the head and follow the lead to those parts of the soul which are in the breast. One of the whole thing about women is one of the last things in the entire dialogue. Incredible. Owing to these practices, they have dragged their front limbs and their head down to the earth. They're planted them. There's some like body horror here. I feel like. Because of their kinship therewith, and they have acquired elongated heads of every shape, according as their several revolutions have been distorted by disuse. On this account, also their race was made four-footed and many-footed, since God that more supports under the more foolish ones, that they might be dragged down still more to the earth. Jesus fucking Christ, dude. And inasmuch as there was no longer any need of feet for the most foolish of these same creatures, stretched with their whole body along the earth, the gods generated these footless and wriggling upon the earth. The fourth kind, which lives in the water, came from the most utterly thoughtless and stupid of men. Fucking get fucked, fish. Losers. Whom those that remolded them deemed no longer worthy even of pure respiration. They've got the thing going on. This is really, really mean to fish. Seeing that they were unclean of soul through utter wickedness, before in place of air, for refined and pure respiring, they thrust them into water. I think plenty of fish are doing perfectly fine in their lives. I don't know about this. They're to respire its turbid depths. Thence have come into being the tribe of fishes and of shellfish and all creatures of the waters. Just go up to a random crab and be like, I know what you did. Which have for their portion the extremest of all abodes and requital for the extremity of their witlessness. Thus both then and now living creatures keep passing into one another in all these ways, as they undergo transformation by their loss or by the gain of reason and unreason. What does a particularly more reasoning crab look like? Would you tell? Like, yeah, that crab's got going on. That crab's thinking about shit. He's gonna be a human next time around. So the amount of humans that need to be drifting around for this to work. Insane level population. And now at length we may say that our discourse concerning the universe has reached its termination. For this our cosmos has received the living creatures both mortal and immortal and been thereby fulfilled. It being itself a visible living creature, embracing the visible creatures, perceptible God made in the image of the intelligible, most great and good and fair and perfect in this generation. Even this one heaven soul of its kind. Okay, so we're done here now. And I wanted to ask, as we move forward, what should our takeaways be from the Timaeus? I think first would be our demiurge, our craftsman god, who came upon the world and found it disordered and felt he had to order it. This idea is very crucial. Be taken up later. It will be reinterpreted. Of course, if you're familiar with the term demiurge, you probably recognize it as an evil figure. It's quite the departure from some of what we've heard here. The second is, of course, the universe is the universe as a living creature, like the whole thing is alive and sort of unitary, and in fact modeled in some way after a living creature that exists on a whole higher level. That is an idea, very crucial. Of course, the idea of just the universe being alive will come back in various forms. The idea of, so if you sort of think about it, if you're living at this, like, because the universe clearly, it has its rules, it operates in certain ways, and you count on that. If there's no person there, the tree falling in the woods absolutely will make a sound. And if you're existing at a time before machinery, your reference point for something that can do that is it's alive, right? So that's where this idea really begins to generate from. So that's very, very cool. I'm quite fond of that. I suppose the sort of next thing, I'm trying to sort of organize this all in my head. It's probably just the sort of absence of creation from nothing. The fact that this was all ordered together, like all this sort of the substance existed before. It was just sort of set into order. Of course, the geometric nature of that substance, that it's all triangles and they can all be sort of converted. And then that oddity that is the dodecahedron, that is the other Platonic solid that is not conversable with the others and seems to have a very different sort of role. But one that, for some reason, can't be commented upon here, not in any length. Maybe that's not for the reader to know. Maybe it's a secret. Were we ever, considering the time, the idea that everyone would just sort of know what a dodecahedron was a dominant. If you said, "Oh, there are 4 solids like this," plenty of people would believe you. So just kind of go like, "Oh yeah, there's a 5th. Don't worry about it. You don't need to know so much about it." A lot of people probably couldn't even picture what that would be. Yeah, the secret dodecahedron. And the idea of a soul as being like a little universe that sort of has rotating in the same way the heavenly spheres rotate. That is probably our final takeaway here, I think. So we'll keep all these ideas in mind as we go forward into other material. But for now, that was the Timaeus. I do encourage everyone to check out everything we skipped. It is not directly relevant to some other things. It will not echo through the ages in quite the same way. It will in others. You think about Galen and whatnot, but I was primarily interested in the cosmological implications of the Timaeus, which is why I didn't go fully into all that. I didn't think I would have had much to say about it anyway. I didn't have much to say about a lot of the precise elemental interaction stuff either. So, we'll leave it there. I'll see you all another time.